And can he tell us when this review will conclude? Because our pubs need urgent help today.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can assure not just my honourable friend, but Keith and Dave from the Titanic Brewery, that we have consulted industry on the prospect of such a lower rate as part of our ongoing alcohol duty review. The team and my honourable friend, the Minister, was working closely with HMRC to further understand the practicalities of the proposals and indeed the cost, and we will provide further updates in due course. But he's right about supporting hospitality in the meantime, Mr. Speaker. I think the temporary VAT cut, the business rates holiday, and indeed freezing beer duty at the last two budgets are all helping in the short term.
Let's welcome the Shadow Chancellor to questions. Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether on social care, Northern Powerhouse Rail or tackling climate breakdown, there is a growing gap with this government between what is promised and what is actually delivered. The Treasury's response to the Net Zero review was first due to be published in autumn last year, and yet it is nowhere to be seen. The COP26 Climate Summit begins in November, and while the UK is hosting, the government can't lead with authority because the fact is you cannot have a climate strategy without a sustainable economic plan behind it. So can the Chancellor please tell the House on what date will he publish the final report of the Net Zero review?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Net Zero report will of course be published imminently, but she talked about last autumn. Last autumn, the Prime Minister published the Green 10-point plan, perhaps the most comprehensive plan from any government anywhere in the world about how we will meet our net zero ambitions. Contained within that plan were £12 billion of new investment, creating probably 250,000 jobs when all is said and done, ensuring our leadership in industries like offshore wind, creating jobs in places like Teesside and Humberside, which is important to the future prosperity of this country, Mr. Speaker. So I think we are doing a great job of getting on with meeting our climate ambitions and demonstrating leadership to the world.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then why not publish the Net Zero review, Chancellor? Because when it comes to this government's net zero strategy, tomorrow never comes. But there is no time to waste because it is all of our responsibility to hand on to our children and our grandchildren a more sustainable planet, creating new opportunities for our pioneering British industries and investing today in the jobs of the future, whether in hydrogen, tidal energy or electric vehicles, to ensure the fair and just transition that we need to see. So since the Chancellor still can't give a date, months after the event, for when he will publish his final report on the Net Zero review, will he commit to ensuring that our net zero carbon targets are hardwired through the forthcoming spending review, as I would do as Chancellor?
Well, Mr. Speaker, meeting our climate ambitions is obviously at the heart of everything that this government is doing. And the Honourable Lady talked about sectors where we should show leadership. I just talked about offshore wind, but we can keep going, Mr. Speaker. Electric vehicles. We're now, in this country, more rapid charging points per mile than any other country in Europe other than Norway. And we're doing more, Mr. Speaker. And she talked about showing leadership. Well, as my honourable friend reminds me, we recently just published the Dasgupta Review, which is a groundbreaking piece of work on tackling biodiversity. She talked about infrastructure. We've just launched the UK Infrastructure Bank, not a million miles away from her in Leeds last week, Mr. Speaker, the home of the infrastructure revolution. And at the G7 summit that I recently hosted, we reached a landmark global agreement to get the G7 to agree to mandatory climate disclosures, because much as she would like, Mr. Speaker, government alone can't solve all these problems. The private sector will have to play its part, which is why climate disclosures across the world will help unlock billions of private capital to help us meet our climate ambitions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Businesses and local government alike will join me in welcoming the launch of the National Infrastructure Bank last week, that's now got its doors open for business, that's deploying capital. Does he agree with me that that's precisely the sort of intervention we need to deliver net zero?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'll briefly pay tribute to his work on tech net zero as well last week. But we did launch the UK Infrastructure Bank last week in Leeds, capitalised with £12 billion from the government. It will unlock £40 billion of investment into tackling both levelling up and our net zero ambitions. And as my honourable friend rightly points out, the team is fantastic. And I take this opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to say an enormous thank you to Chris Grigg for his superb leadership. It's brilliant that we can attract people of his calibre to lead these organisations, and I feel very confident about the UK Infrastructure Bank's future progress.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Alison Thewlis. Alison.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Concerns have been raised that the narrow criteria of the Business Banking Resolution Service have left far too many ineligible, and also that not enough banks are participating in the scheme. So can the Minister tell me, with many businesses now at risk with COVID-19 debt, what does he intend to do about this situation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady is right in the sense that many businesses have taken on debt to get through the crisis, which is why we implemented something called Pay As You Grow, Mr. Speaker. For the over 1 million businesses that took bounce-back loans, they have the ability at their option to turn those loans instantly into 10-year loans, doubling the term, reducing the monthly payments by around half, and take further 6-month holidays or interest-only repayment periods. They can take any of those options, and it will not have any impact on their credit score because we recognise the burdens on cash flow and we want to do our bit to ease them and support our recovery.
Let's go to Dr. Jamie Wallace. Jamie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend confirm that he will not introduce a tourism tax in England? And does he agree with me that if the Welsh Government do this in Wales, then this tax bombshell will mean tourism businesses such as those in Porthcawl in my constituency will be at a distinct competitive disadvantage?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, local taxation in Wales is a matter for the Welsh Government. The UK Government's primary focus, as he will be aware, has been on supporting recovery from the pandemic, and we recognise the tourism sector has been particularly hard hit. That's exactly why we've provided over £7 billion so far through the reduced VAT rate for hospitality, accommodation and attraction industries across the UK. That's why we've extended the reduced rates until the 30th of September 21, and that is why we've put in place a much wider array of support as we come out and play it long in relation to the pandemic.
Withdrawn, so Mark Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Youth Investment Fund remains an important manifesto commitment and will be valuable in supporting young people. Could my right honourable friend inform me of its intended launch date and briefly outline the benefits it will bring to young people in Dewsbury, Mirfield, Kirkburton and Denbydale once it is launched? Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight the importance of the Youth Investment Fund. It was a manifesto commitment and it is due to launch in the coming months. And he will recall at the Spending Review 2020, we allocated some funding to inform pilots as we shape that launch.
Mr. Speaker, virtually every time that I or other members have raised the plight of the millions we've excluded from COVID support, ministers reel off the various levels of support that have been made available to those who have access to it. But without going through again the list of those supports that are available, can the Minister tell me when the Government are going to put in place some level of support for those who have had nothing so far and when it will be backdated to?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman will know, and we've discussed on many occasions, how we have absolutely bent over backwards to attempt to include as many people as possible and have lent into considerable discussion both with excluded groups and other related groups. And as he will know, it's not a single picture. There are different groups that are not included for different reasons, and we have tried to make it. And as a result, in part, we have been able to evolve and extend the programmes, and he'll be aware that we did so in the last iteration of the self-employed scheme.
Angela Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the launch of the National Infrastructure Bank. Road infrastructure projects are needed in my constituency of Guildford to meet the additional 14,000 homes to be delivered in our local plan, which is why I'm calling for the A3 to be tunnelled under Guildford to ease congestion. As we move towards our target of net zero and transition our vehicles to electric and hydrogen run, there will be a decrease in revenue raised by fuel duty. Can my right honourable friend outline what steps he is taking to replace that revenue and to help fund road infrastructure projects such as my tunnel?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She is absolutely right that the Government will need to ensure that revenue from motoring taxes keeps pace with the change away from petrol and diesel fueled vehicles, so that we can continue to fund infrastructure like the A3, which she mentioned. And I'm sure colleagues in DFT can speak to her petition specifically, but I'd like to reassure her and her constituents that this government will continue to focus on record unprecedented investment in the strategic roads network over this Parliament through the £27.5 billion roads investment strategy, which will deliver about 70 major upgrades.
Let's go to Rosie Cooper. Rosie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Chancellor have confidence in the Financial Conduct Authority's ability to appropriately regulate and sanction companies which defraud their investors? And further, does he believe that if it's found that the regulator has failed to prevent this fraudulent activity, that the government has a duty to compensate?
It's absolutely clear that there are significant lessons for the Financial Conduct Authority to learn from the Gloucester Review, and I have regular conversations, indeed just last week, with the new Chief Executive on the transformation programme. He has employed 5 new senior executives to drive that programme urgently, and I look forward to seeing the results of that intervention.
Mr. Speaker, the role of regulation has been spotlighted recently in an independent report by the Task Force on Innovation, Growth and Regulatory Reform, welcomed by the Prime Minister. The report highlights that as the EU has expanded, its internal processes and regulation have become slower and more bureaucratic, impacting on economic competitiveness. What steps is my honourable friend taking to reduce onerous regulation as regards UK Treasury matters to ensure all such regulation reflects our national interest and ensures that the UK maximises its economic agility and competitiveness?
Well, the Honourable Lady rightly recognises the value of the TIGA report, which we received last week, and we'll be looking very carefully at those recommendations. But in addition, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, chairs the Better Regulation Committee, which has been established to drive forward a new strategy to deliver better regulation outside of the EU. There's a lot of work to be done, but progress is being made.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent is a travel counsellor who established her home-based business 9 years ago. She's been excluded from government support because she is not registered for business rates. And when she tried to register for business rates in 2020, she missed the deadline by 6 days because of delays at the valuation office. What financial support can the Treasury give her and the others like her who still remain excluded from support?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She will be aware that the government has made available, initially at least, at £1.5 billion, and then a further top-up sum to local authorities in order precisely to meet hard cases that may fall between the cracks of the very wide-ranging support we've given otherwise. And I would strongly encourage her constituent to talk to a local authority about that funding.
Robert Larkin. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 3rd of March, when the Chancellor announced the £4.8 billion Levelling Up Fund, High Peak was designated one of the top priority areas, and the government committed to give over £100,000 to the council to help them develop a world-class bid. However, despite my urging and having nearly 4 months, I regret to inform the House that my Labour council have failed to submit a Levelling Up Fund bid in time. Can my right honourable friend assure the House and my constituents that there will be a second round for a further bid, and that High Peak will still be considered a top priority area in any future rounds?
Well, I understand, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend's frustration, and he will know from the announcement at budget that the prospectus set out the process, the types of projects, and indeed how bids will be assessed. And indeed, to reassure him, there will be further opportunities for local authorities to submit bids to the fund. And one of the things we are encouraging those local authorities is to work with elected members of Parliament in the shaping of those bids, and I hope they will take the opportunity to now do so.
Let's go to Rushanara Ali. Rushanara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 500,000 young people are out of work and thousands are on furlough. The delay in easing restrictions without associated supports to businesses is set to further increase unemployment by 300,000. And in the event of a third wave of triggering further restrictions, can ministers commit to extending the coronavirus job retention scheme and other support that's been vital for our constituents and businesses in our constituencies.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady talked about outcomes in the labour market. I mean, she will know that we have now had 6 consecutive months of more people in work, which is something to be celebrated. Vacancies are now running higher than they were at the start of the pandemic, which is a fantastic sign of things to come. And on the unemployment rate, as I highlighted earlier, is now half of what was forecast. 2 million fewer people forecast to lose their jobs and lower than most of our major competitor countries. But she is right to highlight, as we have discussed previously, the plight of young people, which is why our interventions, like the Kickstart scheme, like the apprenticeship incentive, will continue to provide opportunity for them up and down the country.
Final question, Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Eldest caravans and motorhomes owned by Owenheimer in Delves Lane, Consett in my constituency, have benefited hugely from the Chancellor's removal of the EU's motorhomes tax. They are now growing as a business and struggling to get candidates to meet job vacancies. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer visit Eldest with me to meet the workforce and management, to see the impact this tax cut has had, and will he also look at what more support can be provided for this vital manufacturing firm in my constituency?
Well, I congratulate Eldest, and I congratulate my honourable friend for giving them the profile and fighting the campaign that he has done, and I congratulate him for the outcome and for its very successful results in this case. Let me tell him that I have had it on very good authority that the Chancellor would be delighted to visit Eldest, and therefore I am in a position to make a binding commitment from the government side, and I'm sure he looks forward to that very much.
I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements for the next business. Order. I now call Joe Stevens to ask the urgent question. Joe Stevens.
Ask the Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport if he will make a statement on the results of the Events Research Programme.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The world-leading Events Research Programme has conducted 14 pilot events across 2 phases since April of this year. The findings from these events will inform decisions around the safe removal of social distancing at step 4 of the roadmap. We committed to publishing the final report ahead of step 4 of the roadmap, and that is what we will do. The report will cover key findings and the operational approach of the research programme. The Events Research Programme has studied some highly complex questions. The guidance for the sector that comes out of this work will, however, be practical, clear and simply set out. Mr. Speaker, following the delay to step 4, the government will now run a 3rd phase of the Events Research Programme. This phase will gather more data, consolidating our evidence base and helping in our aim of getting spectators back to live events in greater numbers. Phase 3 will include trialling the practical use of COVID certification at a range of events alongside other mitigations. Some of these pilot events will be permitted at full capacity, providing visitors demonstrate their COVID status. The men's and women's finals at Wimbledon, for example, will be played with centre court at full capacity, and these matches will be the first major outdoor sporting events held at full capacity in the UK since the start of the pandemic. The Events Research Programme is continuing live discussions with a number of theatres and cultural and business events organisers about their inclusion in the programme, which would see events taking place with larger capacities. Mr. Speaker, I am sure the House recognises how vital this research is in supporting the reopening of venues and sectors that we and our constituents are so passionate about. However, it is important to recognise that public safety is the main priority. Although we are not yet in a position to publish the full report, I can assure the House that post-event data is closely monitored and have not shown any evidence of the events causing outbreaks. If they had, we would have communicated that information urgently.